Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are diving into a crucial topic for our planet carbon footprinting. Whether you are a seasoned environmentalist or just curious about what's going on, this video will guide you and help you understand what carbon footprints are and why they matter. Before we get started, let me know in the comments section if you have ever thought about carbon footprint and what steps you're taking to reduce it. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. So let's get right into it. What is carbon footprint? Carbon footprinting is a measure of total greenhouse gas emissions, particularly carbon dioxide, which are produced directly or indirectly by an individual, organization, event, or product. It spans from landfills and waste to factories and manufacturing activities, agriculture and food production, transportation, energy use. Every of this sector generates carbon, generates CO2 or any form of emissions. It could be methane, which comes from agriculture. It could be nitric oxide, which comes from fertilizers or and other sources. So all of these fossil fuel from transportation, from manufacturing sector, they emit one form of um, emission, one form of greenhouse gas or the other. So this is what carbon footprinting is. Looking at our world in data, we would understand that electricity, heat and transportation make up 73.2% of total global greenhouse gas emission by sector in 2016, sorry. And in all of these, energy use in industry accounts for 24.2%. Within this sector, we can see iron and steel, chemical and petrochemical, food and tobacco, non-ferrous metal, paper and pulp, machinery, and other industries. Within the transport sector, we're looking at 16.2% of greenhouse gas emission. Energy use in buildings has 17.5%, unallocated fuel combustion has 7.8%, fugitive emissions from energy production from coal has 1.9%. So I will include the link to this report in the description box. When we look at our world in data for 2016 versus 2020, we will see that electricity and heat clearly remained the sector with the largest or the highest footprint, followed by transport, manufacturing, and agriculture. And comparing these two, we can see a significant increase in footprint by by 0.09 billion tons for electricity. However, there has been a slight reduction only in transport sector. So looking at these two data, we can see that year on year, emission is increasing across sectors. So all of the things that have been put in place, how is that enabling emissions reduction? We're hoping to see future data to see how that is happening. But from what we have publicly between 2016 to 2020, there has really been no significant reduction in emissions. We only saw something happen in transport sector from the data you see on your screen, but every other sector seems to be on the increase. How does carbon footprint affect our environment? So carbon footprints primarily consist of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. When released into the atmosphere, CO2 traps heat, leading to greenhouse gas effect. This process is natural, but however, human activities significantly increase the CO2 levels, causing the planet to warm at unprecedented rates. So, human activities from burning of fossil fuel to agriculture, farming, a lot of human activities. So, it's understandable that this is a natural process. But because we are increasing our activities within the sectors that emit greenhouse gas, there's now too much of these gases in the atmosphere, which now gets trapped, causing greenhouse effects. The rise in greenhouse gases contributes to climate change, which affects weather pattern globally, and we are seeing more extreme weather events like fire, outbreak, hurricanes, flood, drought. For instance, in recent years, we've experienced high record of heat waves, resulting in wildfire and crop failures in various regions. I've linked my video on the screen on where I explained a like an overview or an understanding of greenhouse gases, greenhouse effect, and everything that concerns global warming. So you need to watch that video to have a thorough understanding of what we're talking about here. Other consequences of increased carbon emission, we're looking at ocean acidification. About 30% of CO2 is absorbed by our ocean, which lowers their pH levels. This affects marine life, especially organisms like coral reefs and shellfish. They rely on calcium carbonate to survive. Healthier oceans are essential for biodiversity and food supply. Biodiversity is crucial for resilient ecosystem, which in turn supports human life. And the loss of these species can totally destabilize the food webs and lead to unforeseen circumstances. Ecosystem disruption like ecosystem disrupts climate change, leading to habitat loss. Animals like polar bears and sea turtles are facing challenges, almost going into extinction, and this is actually not a very good thing for the climate. And then we are looking at human health impacts, how increased carbon footprint is causing very polluted environment, leading to higher chances of having asthma in humans. And we also see events like heat waves posing direct health risk, especially to vulnerable populations. Climate change can also affect food security, leading to malnutrition and associated health issues. How is carbon footprint calculated, or how do you quantify these carbon footprints? So all of these numbers we're seeing, how is it quantified? There are different ways. To understand carbon footprint quantification, there is need to have a thorough understanding of what scope 1, 2, and 3 are. And these scopes allows you to assess what areas of your business emits what, and then you put them in these buckets of scope 1 to 3. I've also done a video to explain what these different emissions are and which scopes they belong to and how you can identify them within the scopes. So once you identify what emissions happen within your business or your area of interest and you're able to classify them into the scopes, then you're able to apply the right accounting to quantify the carbon emissions. But in order to give you an overview, scope 1 emissions are directly generated in the business, like in the company's own activities. It could be from generators. So maybe you're running a generator on site. Those are your scope 1 emission. It could be that you're running a factory or a warehouse and there are activities that are carried out with forklifts. The fuel that are burned during that activity are scope 1. They are these emissions that you can control because they happen in your facility. When we look at scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions. These are emissions that the company don't have direct control of, but they are responsible for. The most common example of scope 2 emissions are purchased electricity. So we all are connected to the grid and we all pay for electricity. The fact that we purchase or we pay for those electricity to operate our businesses or function in our organizations, the emissions as a result of that are classified as scope 2. When we look at scope 3, they are all other emissions that are not in scope 1 and 2. So they are indirect emissions across the value chain and across the supply chain. We're looking at business travel. There are businesses that contract their transport and logistics and distribution parts. So those emissions that emanate from that are scope 3, emissions from waste disposal, waste management and recycling, emissions from production of the packaging that we use for our businesses. When we look at the services industry, most services industry provide advisory or consulting. So emissions that result from execution of those advisory services that have been given to a third party are also scope 3 for the business. So look some part of this at some point I'll link the video explaining what the emission scopes are. Please watch this video to get a more thorough concept. So in calculating emission or quantifying our emission, we're going to use an example, employee travel emissions. This is a scope 3 emission. And yes, I'm very interested in this because I've talked about it, I've analyzed it, and I have it on my newsletter, the Starbucks new CEO Brian Nichols business travel controversy. So it's no longer news that this man lives in Newport Beach and he's supposed to travel to work at Seattle, Washington at least 3 times a week. This journey is 8,200 miles one way, and it's supposed to fly with either a medium haul flight or uh, a small to medium sized jet. Yeah, so it's actually 1,000, about 1,200 miles one way. So two ways is 2,400 miles, and we're looking at the miles covering from 930 to 2,485 miles for the size of jets that Starbucks is supposed to use and transport this guy. Based on the following assumptions, we're going to calculate the emissions for this travel. So we're looking at a jet that cruises at a speed of 400 to 500 miles per hour, averaging 450 miles per hour, and this is a total of 724.2 kilometers per hour. The second assumption is that the total flight time for this distance is approximately 2.7 hours. So all of these data are from the aviation website, which I'll also link in this video so you can have a thorough understanding of where these values are coming from. Also, the another assumption is that we are using the UK government's emission factor and their whole classification. So for the CO2 emissions from these guys' travel, the average CO2 emissions per passenger per kilometer, according to the UK government's emissions factor, is 0.26128 kg. One-way distance of 1,200 miles is equivalent to 1,931 kilometers. So we are looking at the total CO2 emissions. We're multiplying, sorry, that's supposed to be 0.26128, multiplying it by 1931, then the total value we multiply by 2. We are multiplying by 2 because it's a two-way. So if it's one way, we would have just done the straight calculation. But because it's a two-way, we're multiplying by 2 and it's giving us 1009.06 kg CO2 equivalent. So that means for every trip or every return trip this guy makes, there is a 1009.06 kilogram CO2 equivalent that is being emitted. How does that make sense? And then look at that, assuming he's traveling 3 times a week, and look at the annual emissions. So check out the newsletter. I'll put the link to my newsletter in the description box to see how I have analyzed this entire news and controversy. How can you reduce your carbon footprint? In our everyday lifestyle, I will just focus this part of of this video in our everyday lifestyle. So we're looking at reducing, reusing, and recycling within our environment. We can start by minimizing waste. We're looking at controlling how we use electricity or we use our energy, any source of energy around our homes, unplugging devices, switching off light bulbs, switching off television if we're not watching them, just anything that can help us save energy. We can opt for sustainable transport means. Either you can consider biking or walking or using public transport, but that depends on the environment that you are in. I looking at the UK, it's very easy to like switch because there is a more decent public transport system. But when you look at countries like Canada and the US, I'm not sure how that would function, but it's still possible that there could be other sustainable means of transportation that can come in that kind of society. We also consider the diet choices we make, eating less meat, more local food, understanding that we can buy from local farmers. In that way, we understand that our emissions is within and not buying more processed food or food that have traveled miles and miles away into the supermarket. It's possible we don't get all of the foods from our local farms, but we can make conscious efforts to get that. In that way, we're cutting down emissions from the supply chain. A recap. We talked about what carbon footprinting is. We explored emission by sectors. We explored data with emissions from our world in data. Yes, we understood how carbon footprints affect our environment. defined emission scopes, calculated carbon footprint, scope 3 emissions using the employee travel example, and discussed how we can reduce our carbon footprint. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends who might be interested in sustainability and carbon footprinting. Do not forget to subscribe for more content on how we can all live a more sustainable life. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Bye for now.